We're breaking into programming to take you live to the U.S. Capitol, Washington, D.C. You're looking at pictures there from just outside the White House. And what we're expecting very soon to take place is this meeting between the U.S. President Donald Trump and the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. And there's plenty for them to be discussing in the coming hours. We're expecting that meeting to begin quite soon. But Erdogan, of course, has been in the United States for the UN General Assembly. He spoke 2 days ago, and he's also been meeting with leaders from the Arab world and other Muslim majority countries to discuss the war on Gaza. They had a meeting on Tuesday with President Donald Trump. The Americans reportedly putting forth a plan to end the war in Gaza going forward. And President Erdogan actually sitting right next to Donald Trump when that meeting was being held. But like I said, plenty to be discussed during this meeting. In studio, I've got with me Yusuf Erim to discuss more of this. And Yusuf, this is going to be the first time in about 6 years that these two have actually met. For the United States, what are they hoping to get out of this meeting?
Well, of course, the United States has a lot of global and international issues that the Trump administration wants to play a part in solving and resolving. The war in Ukraine, during Trump's presidential campaign, made a promise to his supporters that he would end the war as soon as possible. That hasn't materialized. The Turkish president, back in April 2022, had a peace deal brokered that ended up falling through. Obviously, he also showed diplomatic success working very closely with the United Nations on the Grain Corridor deal. So he has shown the diplomatic chops to be able to get the job done. So this is probably something that U.S. President Donald Trump is interested in, working with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Obviously, the situation in Gaza, the Israeli strike on Qatar, these are things that are disturbing President Trump. He doesn't want to see a Gulf ally getting hit by another one of America's very close allies, Israel. So that's very problematic. And obviously, Erdogan at the table at the big meeting in Doha with all the Muslim leaders. Türkiye, a very close ally of Qatar, a very important regional actor providing security. The stability of Syria, another global issue that's important to President Erdogan. He'll want to see some type of progress on that. And Türkiye, a very, very key player in what's happening in Syria and what could happen in Syria going forward. And NATO as well. I mean, when we look at beyond the war in Ukraine, the security of continental Europe, there's been some concerns with airspace violations in Poland and along the Baltics. There's concerns there. What would happen in the event Article 5 is triggered? Which militaries are ready, have that military readiness, that capability? And I mean, right now, when we look at the state of NATO outside of the Americans and the Turks, maybe you have the Brits to some extent, but the NATO really isn't militarily ready outside of the Americans, the Turks, and the Brits. So again, a lot of interest for the Americans there, and economic and trade interests as well. Trump seems to want to sell F-35s. Of course, the buck doesn't stop at him. He has to have his own Congress on board, get that approval to sell the F-35. So there's a possibility of that. LNG deals, aluminum deals, tariffs. It's a lot to talk about.
It certainly is. And one of the issues is that F-35 fighter jet program. It's something that we on this channel have discussed for a long time because Türkiye was removed from that program. Just explain to us how that all works and why is it so important for Türkiye to be part of that program once again, and the fact that it looks like Trump may say, okay, you can join.
Okay, well, first of all, I want to state that at the time when Türkiye was removed from the F-35 was tremendously important to Türkiye. Today, much less so. I mean, okay, it'll be great to have, it's something that the Turks would want, but domestic alternatives are almost ready to come to inventory in the next couple of years. So, I mean, the Turks have the unmanned fighter jet coming out, the Kızılelma. They also have their fifth generation domestic fighter jet coming out, the Khan. So the Turks have alternatives coming out very, very soon. So it's less of an urgent need. Obviously, it would serve as a stopgap, and even beyond the stopgap, obviously, because it has the stealth capabilities, it has the fifth generation capabilities that the Turks would want. But In the event they do buy, it's a risky purchase because spare parts could get sanctioned in the future. The rest of the order could get sanctioned in the future. So the Turks have been burned on that before. I think they'll be very careful, very wary, and wanting more guarantees if there is a return to the F-35. Yes, they're interested, but it's not dire anymore. If it happens, great. If it doesn't happen, the Turks already have another roadmap. On the other side of that, the CAATSA sanctions. I think at first the CAATSA sanctions were very tough for the Turkish defense industry. They've learned to deal with it right now. Their defense industry is great right now, and the trajectory of the defense industry and their customer base, who they're supporting, tremendously important. One of the big success stories of not just the region, not just Europe or Asia. At the same time, when you look from a domestic perspective, the trajectory of the Turkish defense industry is unparalleled right now. They are a top 10 player in the defense industry, especially when it comes to products like drones, when it comes to electronic warfare, when it comes to small arms, munitions.
Would that be something that the United States would be interested in speaking to Turkey about, especially when it comes to drones, like you say, because over the last few years, that production has become immense. They've really become a world leader in such things.
I think they're tremendously interested because when we look at the capacity of the United States to be able to replace inventory once it's been used or once it's sent into the field, they're lacking capacity too because they have a lot of commitments. They have right now a commitment to support Ukraine. They have a commitment where they're supporting Israel, and they have other commitments, and they have their own military needs. I mean, very recently a Turkish company partnered up with an American company where they're manufacturing mortar munitions, I believe 120 millimeter mortar munitions, which are used at a tremendous amount in the war in Ukraine. And they're, right now, I believe the manufacturing is being done in Texas. So we've already seen an American company calling on a Turkish company to partner up to be able to increase that capacity. And the Turks have shown that they can manufacture at scale. So that defense industry, especially on drones, which hasn't been talked about. America does have a very advanced drone sector, just like the Turks, but it looks like other things, especially small munitions, small conventional arms, it looks like there's a lot of room for cooperation there, and maybe, who knows, in other areas as well.
Absolutely. We'll be keeping a close eye on that. Yusuf, you'll be with us once that meeting does begin. But we are going to take our viewers now to our Jafar Hasnan. He's in Washington, D.C. to continue this conversation ahead of that all-important meeting between Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Donald Trump, expected to happen shortly.
Yeah, did you say it's a 45-second delay?
Something like that.
As soon as I know they're trying to guess ISO.
Thank you very much, Yash. So right now we are seeing live pictures coming to us right outside from the White House. This is the stakeout location that we are seeing on our screens right now. And President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is expected to arrive here at 11 a.m. local time. So in about 5 minutes from now, he will be arriving at the White House. There he will be greeted by President Donald Trump. We are expecting the ceremony to be a warm, welcoming ceremony because the two leaders have enjoyed a great relationship over the past few years. And then right after President Donald Trump greets President Erdogan, they will be heading inside the Oval Office for their highly anticipated bilateral talks. So certainly a very important meeting. A reminder to our audience that President Erdogan is accompanied by senior members of his government, which basically just underscores how significant this visit is for Ankara. And remember, it is the first time in 6 years that the Turkish president has come here for official talks, and the timing could not be more critical, Yasha. At the very top of the agenda is, of course, Gaza, the ongoing Israeli onslaught over there. And earlier this week, I was at the United Nations. I heard the speech of the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan there, where he was addressing world leaders. And over there, he basically strongly condemned what he called Israel's genocidal war on Gaza. And he urged the international community to recognize Palestinian statehood. And with more than 150 countries already doing so, we are expecting that he'll be basically trying to press Donald Trump today to step up U.S. involvement, and both in pushing for a ceasefire and an increasing humanitarian aid to the region. TRT World's Craig Boswell is inside the White House right now, so we're going to cross over to Craig. Craig, so tell me, what are you seeing over there? I guess in about 4 minutes from now, we will be seeing the Turkish president at the stakeout location.
Tarih hayvan dakikalar içinde Cumhurbaşkanı Erdoğan'la Beyaz
Right, expecting him to arrive at this stakeout location at any moment now. In fact, I can tell you that we are shoulder to shoulder with press here waiting this arrival. In fact, if we even widen the shot out a little bit, you can see that there are folks around us, and you'll likely see folks bumping into us and potentially even moving in front of the camera as we're all waiting on the president, Turkey's president, to arrive here. A couple of things to keep in mind as these two presidents gather here. Last time we saw them together, pictured side by side, was at the NATO summit in The Hague back in June. But there are a number of things to keep in mind as these talks here begin today, here in an hour or so. It is the transactional relationship, transactional nature of U.S. President Donald Trump. Look, Turkey's president is well versed in this and has demonstrated a command of this in a number of ways. First of all, the dropping of tariffs, anything from tariffs on U.S. imports into Türkiye, anything from cars to fruit, whereas the U.S. now holds 15% tariffs. So this trade is going to be a big discussion here. But there's also, when you get into military deals, trade in F-35, continuation of talks on that, sale of F-16s, there's again kind of this mastery of this transactional nature of the U.S. president. When Turkey kind of green-lighted Sweden's entrance into NATO, that kind of cleared the way to that 2024 arms sale agreement. That was $23 billion in F-16 sales. So all of those things in the past kind of indicate what kind of takes place here today in the talks between these two men and what they want to achieve going forward. Now we're going to talk about in trade, they want to get some $100 billion of trade. In 2024 is about $30 billion, so they got a ways to go, but the ways is clear. But then these continuing negotiations on the F-35 deal. In fact, you talked to your guest just a few minutes ago, kind of previewing that. Well, Donald Trump has said he expects a positive outcome in these talks. So the stage is set for the two men to meet here in the Oval Office. They expect the talks to be fruitful, as I think we've heard President Erdogan put it, and likely to be that way, Jafar. And a couple of things to keep in mind. There are stumbling blocks you're going to get when you talk about Russia and Ukraine. You're going to talk about the sale of Russian oil. The U.S. wants NATO and European countries to put 100% tariffs on anyone who buys Russian energy. And, of course, Gaza. Israel's onslaught on Gaza is going to be a big part of this discussion. While the U.S. may think it's Israel that's isolated on this, it's really the U.S. that's become increasingly isolated on this matter in its refusal to recognize the two-state solution, to recognize Palestine as a state, and, of course, U.S. continuing support of Israel in the terms of some $4 billion a year in arms sales. So it's all of those things are going to be on the table here as these two men prepare to meet here in the next hour. Back to you.
That's Craig Boswell, live for us from the White House. Craig, thank you very much indeed. So certainly a critical moment. Significant meeting is going to take place at the White House between President Donald Trump and Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Any moment now, the Turkish president can arrive, will be arriving at the White House. We can see a huge presence of the media right outside the stakeout location. Let's discuss this further. Joining me here is Professor William Lawrence. Professor, great to have you here with us on this program. So, of course, as we have been saying that President Erdogan and President Erdogan, they both enjoy a very good relationship. So tell me, how much of that personal relationship can actually translate into concrete policy shifts between the two countries when they start their meeting in the Oval Office today?
It matters a lot, especially to President Trump. It's a very personalized foreign policy where Trump makes decisions to as large a degree as he can based on his personal relationship with the leader. There's been a lot of analysis lately, particularly since the Trump-Putin meeting in Alaska, about how Trump sort of learns directly, learns experientially, learns on the job. And no matter how much advisors tell him things, it isn't until he has the personal experience of hearing something from a foreign leader and making his judgment about his own personal relationship with the foreign leader that he makes concessions. If I could sort of go into, I think, the dynamics of this meeting a little bit, I think Trump is coming in with a business agenda in many respects. Bloomberg is pitching this as a $50 billion meeting in terms of contracts, and I think for Erdogan, this is more of a political and geopolitical meeting. And so it'll be interesting, I think, I think Erdogan's way to get wins in the situation is by talking business, and then as the business deals start to gel, then he can ask Trump for political concessions. You know, whether it's on the F-35s, whether it's on Gaza, whether it's on something to do with Israel and Syria. I think Erdogan will be able to get some concessions from Trump if the business side seems to be gelling, and that's just unfortunately the way they are.
And talking about business, Professor, I mean, we have heard the American side say that they want the trade volume to increase to $100 billion, for example. Right now it's at $30 billion on an annual basis. Do you think that's realistically possible right now?
Probably not in the short term. Definitely for the longer term, why not? I mean, there's really no upper limit on, and these are two of the countries with some of the best productive capacity in the world. I mean, they have the ability to grow. They have large, educated populations with a lot of resources that could produce a lot more products, trade a lot more products. So there's really no, for the long term, there's really no, I think, limit on the upside of the relationship. But there have been political issues, as we know well. There was a bit of a cratering during the Biden administration. There were problems in the late Trump administration in the relationship. And now we're at this point where everything's on the upswing. And so it's a very good time to discuss, you know, all of these different aspects of the Turkish-American relationship, including the business relationship, where there's a huge capacity for upside.
Okay, now, Professor, given that this is going to be their first encounter at the White House in 6 years, how important is the symbolism of the moment that we're going to see in a few moments from now?
I think it probably matters more to Turkey and the world where it's taking place in terms of the symbolism. But the fact that they have a one-on-one meeting, because usually Erdogan and Trump sort of run across each other in multilateral meetings. Like just happened on Tuesday, right? But they don't get a chance to go one-on-one with large delegation that Erdogan's bringing in, go through a list, and get some serious time to talk about a set of issues and make progress. And you know, Trump, whether you like him or you don't like him, he is transactional. You know, and if you are offering things, and I'm sure Erdogan will be offering things, Trump will be receptive and then probably start offering things as well. So, so a lot of good things can happen out of a meeting like this. Of course, we never find out everything. You know, a lot of promises get made and commitments get made, and so we don't always know everything that comes out of a meeting. But we'll be able to tell after the meeting, you know, by the press gaggle, by the leaks, by the, you know, all the ways in which we find out whether the meeting was a huge success or somewhat of a success or not, because you can often glean a lot of things during and then after the meeting.
What do you think Donald Trump can offer Turkey right now?
Help with Israel in all of the theaters where Israel's a problem. The F-35s is a big issue. Other military sales, sort of turning the page on the problems the U.S. is having with Russia, you know, vis-a-vis the Turkish relationship, turning to Turkey for more help on Ukraine, as Turkey's done great things on Ukraine, but there could be more, you know, getting Turkish help on all of the regional conflicts. I mean, there's
do you see a possibility, talking about Ukraine, Professor, do you see a possibility where Turkish President Erdogan might get directly involved when it comes to organizing this meeting between Putin, Zelensky, and even Donald Trump?
It'd be great if he could. You were up at the UN, and you know how many presidents offered to mediate. The Serbian, you know, Slovakia. I mean, everyone was offering to mediate. And but there are a few countries better positioned than Turkey in every sense of the word position, you know, to play a positive role there. And all the big breakthroughs have been with either Turkish direct hosting and involvement or Turkish help. But again, on all the conflicts, on Syria, I mean, the big supposed deal that MBS and Trump worked out on Shara, that was very much Turkish organized, you know, and so Turkey's either playing the lead role or one step back from the lead role on probably 10 different conflicts that are going on in the region. So Turkey can play a big role, and I think one of the things the Trump administration is trying to do is delegate more of regional security to U.S. allies in the region. So there's a big sort of upside in what Turkey could do in sort of taking over sort of management of certain conflicts in cooperation with the United States. But you know, it all depends on how this meeting goes. And I said, unfortunately, they probably won't start with geopolitics. They'll start with business, you know, and as the business deals start working out, then they'll shift to the politics.
Okay. All right. Professor William Lawrence, thank you very much for your insights. Let's get an update now from the White House. Craig Boswell is there for us. So Craig, it's 6 past 11 a.m. local here in Washington. I think there's a bit of a delay, but any moment the Turkish president may arrive at the White House now. Talk to us about what you're seeing over there and also about the security arrangements, because right before coming here, we saw a lot of heavy police presence on the streets. In fact, Professor William Lawrence was telling me that, yeah, some of the streets have been closed as well.
Right. Certainly a heavy police presence that has been on hand here in D.C. for some time, but even now heavier as we later in the week and then on Monday have the visit by Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, but heavy presence here in the Washington area, even as we have the president coming back from the UN. And I'll just tell you, I'm keeping my hand on my ear a little bit here because it's a little hard to hear some of you because there's so many of us here in anticipation of this meeting. We're all crammed in here side by side. But look, as your guest was also saying, there are things to look for out of this meeting. There are also surprises to look for out of this meeting. As we know from U.S. President Donald Trump, there are typically surprises, as in this week when he did an about-face on the Russia-Ukraine war, saying that he felt that Ukraine could win back territory that has already been taken by Russia since its invasion of Ukraine, the full-scale invasion, 2022. There are other things on the table here when these two men meet in the Oval Office to begin their discussions here in the next hour or so. You're going to have minerals deals that are on the table here. You're going to have nuclear power that is also going to be something they're going to be talking about on the table here. On basic military trade and basic military sales, you're going to have GE aircraft. You're going to have what Donald Trump says is a large-scale deal on GE aircraft. Donald Trump kind of in his post kind of hinted towards a large deal, a big deal, he says, on F-16s. And, of course, the continuing talks on the F-35 deal. That we know that there are 6 of those F-35s that have already been completed that are sitting in a hangar and ready to transfer. And we also know that through Türkiye has already put a down payment of some $1.5 billion on these. So a lot of this is in momentum. The momentum of this is there. Then you have the things to keep in mind that could be kind of hiccups in that momentum. So in arms sales, it is the State Department that has to make Congress aware of the intent of the administration for these sales. And then Congress has a period of time in which to block these sales, even though a lot of times that block is not successful. But that's kind of some of the things that have to play out in terms of arms sales. But, you know, Trump, in kind of previewing this meeting on his post, said he expects a positive outcome when it comes to the F-35. And as your previous guest had said, maybe it's not quite so important to Turkey at this point, but it is certain that something that will that we're talking about in the long run. And for the U.S. side, look, U.S. President Donald Trump is aware and is keenly aware of what could happen to his Abraham Accords, his signature deal in his first administration, if in fact he doesn't keep Israel from occupying, continually occupying and taking more of this West Bank territory. And so that is going to be one of the kind of leverage points that countries have over this administration when trying to rein in Israel and its onslaught on Gaza. That's going to be part of the large-scale discussion here, and kind of the U.S. support for Israel, kind of one of those just incredible sticking points that's going to have to be negotiated as these two men meet here in the Oval Office. And I keep looking off to my left, to your right. We're seeing some of the movement by the honor guard. You probably have a live picture of this up where you could see potentially some of that movement. But certainly a lot on the table. We've had these two men preview this meeting in positive terms. We've had members of the administration previewing this meeting in positive terms, that the things are going to move forward with the two. They have a warm relationship. They expect to build on that. And I'm going to turn around a little bit and look and see what's going on behind me. So this, where we're standing here, is kind of this press area where we have a lot of folks come from the administration, and they will give interviews right here. I'm just off from where we typically do live shots here from the lawn of the White House, where there are a number of tents for the networks and for all of the international media that covers the White House. You're probably seeing a lot of the military guard now going in behind me, getting in place for the arrival of President Erdogan here at the White House. So it's always one of those situations here when you get into this kind of packed press area. There's a lot of energy coming from this because there's a lot of energy that always emanates from the Oval Office, and it just bumps up an extra layer when you have world leaders coming in, when you have so many things that are on the table and so much at stake in these types of meetings, and so much that could go forward and so much momentum that can be built on this. So you always kind of feel that energy coming from the Oval Office, and the energy and coming from all of the international media here that's reporting on this. Back to you.
That's Craig Boswell live for us from the White House. Craig, thank you very much indeed. As Craig was reporting that we are seeing some movement at the White House. The Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan must be arriving any moment now. Professor William Lawrence, you can also see the live feed here in front of us right now. Tell us what's going on there.
So I have spent some time in the White House back when I was a State Department official. This is the main formal entrance, the back entrance, which media stands way back from usually, as opposed to the other side of the. I also noticed going by the White House today that all the old fences are up. So it's a bit more of a fortress than it was, even a few months ago. So a lot more security just in general. Trump seems to prefer that. And also a lot more aggressive police actions. I've noticed that since Trump took over the police force of Washington, D.C., I'm seeing police sort of behave in a much more active way, unabashed way.
You also deploy the National Guard in D.C.
Yeah. And so it's just amazing to see how they don't seem to be hedging what they're doing. Everything's done in a very forceful,
Professor, I'm just wondering, since you have been at the White House before, you worked there, what happens once a president enters this particular gate? Where do they go? I assume they go to the Oval Office. How does it look like? How's the whole environment over there in a meeting of this importance?
So the Oval Office isn't far from there. You have to go in, and then it's just around the corner. There's the East Wing and the West Wing. There are parts that are more public, that are more like a museum, and tourists go through the White House many days of the year. And then there are other parts that are more private. They have their own kitchen, they have their own, side meeting and waiting rooms. But with such a large delegation, there's also a bit more pomp and circumstance. There's a little bit of a gift shop in there where they can buy like White House M&Ms and stuff like that. So there's a little bit of a tourism aspect. Anyone who's first timer in the White House, which are probably a lot of the delegation is, will want photos here and there and everything. So actually, there'll be a lot of things going on that aren't business, as sort of people find their way into this very special place. But in terms of the meeting itself, Trump will probably staff as much as the Turks are there. So I don't know what the exact number are, but let's say there's 6 Turkish officials. You'll probably see 6 American officials line up, on the other side, often counterparts from the same ministries. And then, in the old days, when Trump did less of the decision-making entirely, when a president does less of the decision-making entirely themselves, you might see a lot of deferring to the cabinet. But these days, Trump's style is more talk to me. Tell me what you want. And he'll often change his mind on a policy on the fly. And the Turkish leaders know this. Like he can shift a policy on a dime based on something he just heard.
Professor William Lawrence, I'm sure you would agree with me on this one. President Erdogan has always been very direct with Donald Trump.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that frankness is appreciated. I think Trump was always predisposed to get along with and like Erdogan, but it was the structural aspects of the relationship that were problems, rather than their personal relationship. And so, the personal dynamics, we'll see a little bit of that if there's a photo spray with the two leaders talking. You'll get some of the body language, but once the press leaves, then that's when they start to talk Turkey. And I would be interested also to see if at some point Trump doesn't try to separate Erdogan from his delegation and maybe go have a one-on-one conversation. And there's been another thing that's been going on in a lot of the Trump meetings in the last 9 months, which is that there are business of state meetings and then there are business meetings. So I'll be interested to see if there are any CEOs there, any business leaders, if there are any deal making, because Trump, as many leaders were telling me during UNGA, Trump's often trying to increase that amount of investment and that amount of trade raw number globally. He likes to tout it in his speeches. So he'll be looking for sort of big numbers of investment and big numbers of trade that he can up from this meeting. And sometimes to make that happen, it isn't just a government to government conversation, So it'll be interesting to see, how much business is going on next to the business of state, during the meeting in the White House.
When this meeting was announced,
Yeah.
what went through your mind?
Erdogan has a lot to accomplish, so it's good he got the meeting. It's good that this is happening before the Netanyahu meeting on Monday. It's good that when they have so much to discuss that they get this time now. I mean, there are 193 members of the UN, as you know. All 193 delegations wanted one-on-one meetings with Trump. Not a lot of them got it. There was that group meeting of the 8 Arab and Muslim state leaders on Tuesday, and not all of those people got individual
And I think
meetings.
that just goes to show how important is Ankara for Washington.
Yeah. And as Ankara knows, but Americans don't always know, Turkey's in the middle of everything. Turkey's right there between Europe and Africa and the Middle East and Asia. And on many levels, as I said before, it's positioned to help on almost everything that's important to the United States, maybe beyond the Far East. Like everything revolves around Turkey in one way or another. So Trump is going to have a lot of things he wants to discuss, and hopefully the meeting will be very long. I don't know if you saw any estimates on how long the meeting was supposed to be, but the longer it goes, probably the better.
And then we're also hearing that after their meeting at the Oval Office, there's going to be a bilateral lunch. Is that something common when President Trump hosts world leaders here?
Not necessarily. I mean, everybody gets lunch, but the nature of the lunch, the size of the lunch, the location of the lunch, how many people are coming to the lunch, whether business leaders are coming to the lunch, all of that matters. So you'd have to give me more details on the lunch, but that's a good sign, obviously. Does that mean the lunch starts after 1 hour or 2 hours? That'll be interesting. But the longer Erdogan can discuss with Trump the large number of issues he has to discuss, and the more business that can get done, the better. I also haven't seen the president's schedule today. Does he have somebody at 3 p.m.? I don't know.
He does actually. He's hosting the Pakistani Prime Minister.
At what time?
At 4 p.m., if I'm not mistaken,
so
4:30 p.m.
Erdogan
local time.
should try to fill every minute he can until 4
so President Trump
p.m.
has a packed schedule today because after this meeting, I believe he'll be signing executive orders, and then right after that, he'll be welcoming the Pakistani Prime Minister. Certainly a busy day.
Yeah.
Now, Professor William Lawrence, if there's one thing that really stands out for you when you look at the relationship between Washington and Ankara, what would that be?
Well, me personally, because I'm not on the business side of things, I really care about the geopolitics of it all, and I would have to say, particularly at this United Nations and with this circumstance, the Gaza issue stands out. And I think a lot of us didn't do a good job over the last 2 days of analyzing what the Trump plan that was proposed on Tuesday actually means. I think a lot of us have been quick to criticize the plan because it's been seen by Middle East experts as sort of a retread of the Jared Kushner proposal from the first administration, which went nowhere because it was sort of an economic plan for Palestine that didn't really include the politics of it all sufficiently. But I've seen a lot of interesting tweaking. If you believe the Axios reporting, this plan looks quite good, at least on paper, in certain respects. And Erdogan
How different is it from the one that was proposed months ago by Donald Trump, in which he wanted to turn Gaza into Middle East Riviera?
Very different. I mean, there's a lot more in there. And again, I was one of the people, even yesterday in the media, quite critical of the plan because what had been described to me of the proposal was very negative. But once I saw the leaks in Axios and some of the other reporting, it became clear to me that people like Erdogan are starting to have an influence on Wickoff and Rubio and Trump in terms of the political side and the Palestinian dimensions of the plan. And we know Erdogan correctly just wants a ceasefire, and everything else is gravy. But it would be great if the U.S. is starting to become more understanding of the rights of the Palestinians and the needs of the Palestinians beyond just building a Riviera, building housing and building things, to replace everything that was destroyed during this awful war. And so it seems that the politics of it all is becoming clear to the Trump administration. I've been hearing from my sources that J.D. Vance is playing a more and more positive role, whereas, Kushner has been out of the loop and Wickoff has been sucked in by other stuff and hasn't always been focused on this. And of course, after the bombing of Doha, the Arab and Muslim world are much more unified than before, and all of that is translating into more White House attention to the political details they had been ignoring before. So again, the most important thing today is, can Erdogan move the chess pieces forward on a Gaza ceasefire.
We'll see when the meeting starts. Let's get another update now from Craig Boswell. He's inside the White House right now, right across from this stakeout location. That's where the Turkish president will be greeted by U.S. President Donald Trump. So, Craig, I understand there's a bit of a delay. Do you know why is that?
Birbirine belki ufak iltifatlarda bulunması, hoş geldin cümlesi bile bizim için önemli bir mesaj olacak.
Jafar, a little bit hard to hear you. I think you have pointed in our direction here, but I wanted to let you know, still no sign yet of President Erdogan arriving here, arriving towards the White House. And once we do see him arriving, we'll see the car rolling past the honor guard. Interesting to note, other times we have been here for the arrival of world leaders, particularly what comes to mind when it was this packed was when Vladimir Zelensky was here, the same day that European leaders were here. It was the European leaders who went in, another entrance to the White House went kind of around this, and then Vladimir Zelensky was brought in through his motorcade here. That's not the case. It's just one of those times that reminded me of that, because as we wait, we're still waiting to see President Erdogan arrive here. A couple of things of note that we've discussed probably in the last hour or so when we talk about the momentum and the relationship between these two men. Not any differences that they're probably bridging, but things that they already agree on. There's the agreement on Syria, as a matter of fact, and moving forward in Syria. They seem to be kind of traveling the right direction there. Of course, for U.S. President Donald Trump and his transactional nature, he's very much looking forward to U.S. companies kind of helping in the rebuilding of Syria. But the two leaders, when they're meeting here at the White House today, they will talk about the moving forward in Syria. And we've touched on that during these UN meetings as well. So a lot on the table as these two men have prepared for this meeting here in the Oval Office today. When President Trump kind of previewing this, of course, hit on the major issues. Of course, the trade. The two have set a goal of about $100 billion in trade. That's kind of left over from the first Trump administration. In 2024, U.S.-Turkey trade was about $30 billion. So they're going to want to build on that. And, of course, tariffs have been part of that equation, with Turkey removing any tariffs, or a lot of the tariffs, not all of them, but a lot of the tariffs on importing of U.S. goods. So that may be part of that discussion today, as the U.S. Still holding about 15% tariffs on the importing of Turkish goods into the U.S. Then, of course, military sales, GE aircraft that we've touched on before, multi-billion-dollar sales here in these areas. There's talk about that there would actually be the GE motors that would be purchased to use in the already existing F-16 aircraft. Some have kind of doused a little bit of water on that fire, saying the fact that there's already a deal in place for those F-16s. It's likely that deal would be changed at this point, since it was agreed to on the jets and not so much just on the parts and the engines of those. But as we've learned from U.S. President Donald Trump, anything, of course, is possible. I do agree with your guest when he was talking about later on today, as this meeting progresses, the longer it goes, the likely more positive signal that is, and that we may actually get some kind of indication once this meeting begins and once it's over, once we see kind of the maybe kind of the body language or the statements that come out of the White House or come out of the various governments. Sometimes they're very short, but you can kind of, they're a little tepid even sometimes, but you can kind of read between the lines in some of those statements on kind of what took place and what's going to happen next. And of course, that is always what we want to look forward to. What happens next after this meeting today? What are the agreements, and how do those agreements move things forward in terms of not just the international relations between Türkiye and the U.S., but also the wider region and what is going to take place, and how all of the countries can kind of push the U.S. into pushing pressure on Israel to end its onslaught on Gaza. That's one of the questions that also came up during President Trump's visit with the British Prime Minister. There was a question from a reporter, why don't you put pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu to end this war? And then President Trump kind of pushed that off onto what he considers would be an appropriate end to that war, which is number one for him is the hostages. But I believe we are getting a little bit closer, Jafar, as I there was a sudden kind of in a very noisy place, kind of a sudden kind of hush that came over some of the reporters here as we wait for President Erdogan to arrive. But that's kind of where we stand as we look down the row of honor guards towards the entrance and see a few brake lights out that way, but have not seen yet, as of yet, the motorcade. So things beginning a little bit late, not unusual in these types of situations at all, not unusual, but likely that's going to push things further back into the day. And as we've talked about, maybe even lengthening some of these meetings today, which could be a sign of maybe some positive events and positive agreements coming out of this. Back to you.
That's Craig Boswell live for us from the White House. Craig, thank you very much indeed. You are seeing live pictures coming to us out of the White House. That's the stakeout location that you are seeing on your screen. So right now, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan will be arriving there any moment now. Certainly a very important meeting. Of course, the stakes are high. There are many items on the agenda that will be discussed between the two leaders. To discuss this further, joining me now here is Rich Outsit. He's a foreign policy analyst. Rich, thank you very much for joining us here on TRT World. So how significant is this moment that we're going to see at the White House for the relationship between the two countries?
Well, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me. I think we can answer that question on two levels. The first is the level of optics and symbolism. The fact that this is the first meeting with the U.S. president, obviously, during the Biden administration didn't happen. There was a meeting with President Trump in the first term that was somewhat controversial because of some events that happened during the D.C. visit. So this is a chance to present an optic of two leaders who have traveled a road that's very parallel in some ways, who have a good personal relationship, and who both see a world of opportunities open between the two countries to reconverge, in a sense, after a decade or so of very tumultuous times in the bilateral relationship. The second level is the level of actual problem solving, right? Because there are a number of outstanding problems in regional policies, in strategic competition, and bilateral trade, things like that. So I think this is an important opportunity. I don't think all of the problems that are on the plate are going to get solved, but I think we're going to see some progress on some. And so at that level, I think it's important. But
when you say some, which problems do you think we'll see some sort of progress on?
Well, look, I think the meeting that the Muslim majority nations had with President Trump up in New York about the Gaza situation was very important. I think the instincts of President Trump and President Erdogan are sort of in the same direction, if maybe in different degrees of intensity on this. They both want to see an end to the war in Gaza. So I think there's going to be some discussion about practical ways to pursue that, ways to reconcile the somewhat more cautious U.S. approach with the more forward and more urgent approach of the Muslim majority countries, including Turkey. That's one. Ukraine, I think, is another. Bilateral trade is the big thing that these two men have in common, right? The $100 billion goal. Yeah. I think you're going to see some announcements that come out of this in fields like critical minerals, in terms of energy, and perhaps in defense industry. Maybe not the big one being the S-400 F-35 equation, but there'll be some announcements as well. I think you're going to see good progress in that regard. And so again, I would say probably it is on a scale of 1 to 5, it's a 5 in symbolic importance and probably a 3 or a 4 in practical importance, because there are many details to be worked out between the two countries even after this meeting.
So overall, I believe that it's going to be a positive meeting, right? Because what we are seeing happen right now, especially in the lead up to this meeting, positive statements coming from both sides. Now, it's interesting, though, that you also say that we might see something in terms of development in the Middle East, Gaza, and this is what Professor William Lawrence also said, that there's going to be some sort of development, because certainly it's on the top of the agenda. We have seen Turkish president's speech at the General Assembly. Yeah. Of course, he spoke about Gaza at length, and then the meeting that you mentioned, Donald Trump hosting Arab leaders and Muslim leaders at the United Nations 2 days ago. In terms of this encounter between the two leaders, are you saying that we might see some sort of a breakthrough when it comes to Israel's war in Gaza?
Well, look, at the end of the day, the breakthrough has to come next week rather than this week, because that's when Netanyahu is going to visit. And at the end of the day, Netanyahu has not done a great job of anticipating and deferring to President Trump's wishes. President Trump has said multiple times some version of let's end the active phase of the war in Gaza.
Rich, sorry to interrupt you there. Right now we can see Donald Trump. He has just come out of the door. there at the White House, and I believe the Turkish president will be arriving any moment right now. You were watching TRT World special coverage. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan will be arriving here at the White House any moment now. We can already see President Donald Trump. He's ready there to greet the Turkish leader, and certainly it is expected it's going to be a warm welcome. The two leaders have enjoyed a great relationship over the past few years. So certainly a very important moment that we are seeing on our screens right now. And right after President Erdogan is welcomed by President Donald Trump, the two leaders will head inside to the Oval Office for their highly anticipated bilateral talks. Right now, we are seeing Donald Trump on our screens right now. He is there ready to greet the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. So certainly a very important and critical meeting is going to take place at the White House today. President Erdogan, as we understand, is going there with a big delegation. Top members of his government are accompanying the Turkish president, and certainly there are many items on the agenda in this meeting. Right now, we can see the American president on our screens right now. So, Rich, I understand you have been covering the political dynamics of this country and, of course, foreign policy as well. Tell me the significance of the moment that we are seeing right now.
Yeah. Well, there are so many things in the region and in the two capitals that are lining up for a new era of cooperation between the two. And I've been doing this long enough, really involved in the U.S.-Turkish relationship since 1990, and I've seen several cycles of ups and downs. And in the 90s, of course, a commodious relationship where we cooperated many places, Somalia, Bosnia, Kosovo, solving those regional problems, and the trade between the two countries was high. Then we went through a very...
All right, I believe now the Turkish president's car is arriving at the White House. So I believe in a few moments from now, the Turkish president will be coming out and will be greeted by the American President Donald Trump. You are seeing live scenes from the White House here on TRT World. Turkey's president is visiting the White House, and there you go. You see the Turkish president's car, and now he is coming out of the car. His door is being opened, and there you go. He's being greeted by Donald Trump. And, you know, as we expected, it's going to be a warm welcome. So a very strong handshake there, Rich. What do you make of what we're seeing right now?
Well, there's a real camaraderie between these two. And it's not my original observation, but one I agree with, that they've gone through parallel paths. Both of them have, were not men whose careers were cut on national level politics. One was a mayor, then one was a real estate developer. Both have been very controversial. Both have been in their positions now for some significant period of time. Trump for 4 years and now another 4. Erdogan has seen 5 presidents come and go. And they've both been the victims of slings and arrows, so to speak, in terms of very vociferous domestic and international opposition. So I think these men feel a real camaraderie, and I think that alongside the fact that structurally there's convergence, there's a real friendship.
Rich, if I can just talk to the pictures right now. So we just saw the Turkish delegation also step inside the White House. I saw the Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan, and of course the Communications Director of the Republic of Turkey was also there, Burhan Turan. They're all accompanying the Turkish president as part of this meeting. So now I believe the two leaders are heading to the Oval Office. You have covered these meetings before, Rich, so tell us what might be going on inside right now.
Well, usually for a meeting like this, most of it is highly scripted. When the two teams will have been negotiating texts of what is going to be announced and who's going to say what and sort of the key topics for several days, they would have agreed to these things. So again, my understanding based on our discussions in New York earlier this week with our Turkish colleagues is that it is going to be a combination of the bilateral trade and areas of cooperation there. And again, we'll see some announcements. They're going to be reviewing those points and then publishing them. They'll be talking about the regional hotspots and where we overlap and align in policy. And it's not going to be everything because there is still some divergence between the two countries on some of their spots. And then they'll probably have some discussions about global world order issues, about concerns over peace. Always President Erdogan brings up the function of the United Nations and how it's broken, and the world is bigger than 5 in his word. And as you know from this week, President Trump also a critic of the United Nations, although this week it has more to do with escalators and teleprompters than anything else. So I think all of those things are going to be discussed. But don't forget the experience of President Zelensky of Ukraine earlier this year, right? So things can go awry sometimes. Now, I don't expect that because these two are old friends, so to speak. And I think the Turkish side is very careful and very aware of the fact that there are some ways, some things that could be said that could be sort of derail the generally good path that's planned for the conversation. But again, highly scripted. There's going to be some warmth, probably a little bit of joking, and then they're going to get to the review of these issues that are good news stories, especially about the bilateral trade and the regional cooperation on major crises.
And along with that, I think defense ties will also be discussed, right? And one thing that is going to stand out is certainly the F-35 deal, Rich. So Turkey paid, as we know, $1.4 billion for F-35 jets program, and of course, it was removed from that program. It never received those jets. So what kind of development can we see in that regard as part of this meeting?
Right. Well, I know that there's been many discussions, I think, both in Ankara and Washington about how the sequencing of this should work. I think there's a consensus developing in the Congress and in the executive branch that it's only fair that having bought those, 6 F-35s, that's Turkish property. And ultimately, those need to go to Turkey. And yet, especially in the Pentagon and among defense technology experts, there is concern about the S-400. We can't just wish that issue away. The fact that a very sophisticated Russian air defense system that was designed in many ways with algorithms to capture the data from the F-35, it was almost purpose-built for that. Having that in Turkey is and has been a problem. Now, it's a 10-year-old problem, and it's not one without a solution. So talking about the sequencing of how Turkey does something to reassure the United States that there will be no technological threat to the F-35 by having it flying over the same airspace where you have the S-400 located. That could be making it inoperable, relocating it, putting some sort of mutual verification mechanism into place. That can all be done. I'm not sure that they will have done all of the detailed planning to agree to that today. But I think what we'll see is a renewed statement that they intend to do so. And who knows, they could surprise. We may see something on that. If not today, then I would expect it before the end of the year.
And then, of course, Turkey also wants to update its F-16 fleet, right? So if Turkey moves forward with that right now, and we know Turkey is the second largest army in NATO, how do you think that's going to reinforce NATO's posture?
Well, the Turkish vision, as I understand it, for their air modernization, because they have a big fleet of F-16s, but they're older models, is to go with something like 40 of these Block 70 F-16s, which are a leap in capabilities from the ones that they currently have. 40 of those, 40 F-35s if they get back in the program and can purchase more than just the 6, and then 40 Eurofighters. Now, the combination of those or some permutation of that would so vastly improve the strength of Turkey's air defenses that it would essentially render impossible for Russia to try to do on the southern flank of NATO what it's been trying to do on the northern flank. You're aware of the air violations over Estonia and Poland in recent months. I think Turkey has sent an AWACS plane, an airborne warning and control system plane, to Poland. It's made very clear that it intends to help with the defense of NATO airspace. And I think by strengthening with these 120 modern aircraft, which has been kind of the stated goal, not only in Turkish airspace, but for the rest of NATO, they're willing to send those planes to help defend and secure those areas. I think it'd be a very powerful uplift for NATO's capabilities.
Rich Outzen, thanks very much. Fascinating insights. Certainly a very important day for Ankara. The meeting between the two leaders, I believe, is about to begin. They're heading to the Oval Office right now here on TRT World. We'll be keeping you up to speed about all the latest developments coming out of this meeting. For now, back to you, Yashini.
Jaffer, and your guests, Rich and Professor William Lawrence, great to get their takes on what we've just seen. President Erdogan meeting there with President Donald Trump at the White House as that meeting begins. And for more on this, I've got our editor-at-large, Yusuf Aram. He's here with me in studio. And Yusuf, you've been watching all of that along with us, that meeting of the two men, the friendly handshake, the turn to the cameras. A lot to be discussed, as Jaffer has been speaking to his guests about things like defense and trade. But listening to the analysts, they said this would most likely start on issues like trade before moving into bigger topics, especially when it comes to geopolitics. We know that Türkiye will definitely bring up the issue of the war on Gaza and possibly putting more pressure on the United States to put pressure on Israel to bring this war to an end.
Well, definitely it's going to start with trade and economics. At the end of the day, trade, bilateral trade, inflating it and advancing it is in the interests of both sides. Trade is also a safety net for the relationship. It's a safety net for any diplomatic relationship. At the end of the day, if you're trading a lot with someone, you're making a lot of money together with another country, that country's probably a preferred country for you amongst your list of allies or inside of your diplomatic portfolio. So countries that have these types of strategic relationships, they want to build that safety net with economics, with trade, where they become vital for each other. And by becoming vital for each other, it opens a lot more diplomatic space. And there's a lot that both can do on the trade issue. As you mentioned, I think the LNG issue is important for Donald Trump. I think a hardware sale, let's call it, whether it's a Boeing hardware sale, whether it's the Lockheed Martin hardware sale via the F-35 or the F-16, however that's going to transpire and materialize, Trump wants to get these types of sales under his belt because they really are important to his America First policy, saying, look, I'm keeping jobs in the U.S., I'm bringing money in, these are big ticket sales, he is the salesman. So these are something that are very important to him.
Okay, Yusuf, I understand that we can actually just break in to listen to what they're saying.
Friends for a long time, actually, even for 4 years when I was in exile, unfairly, as it turns out. Rigged election, you know, he knows about rigged elections better than anybody. But when I was in exile, we were still friends. That's always a good way to find out, test of friendship. But he's a highly respected man. He's respected very much in his country and all throughout Europe and throughout the world where they know him. He's built a tremendous military, powerful military, uses a lot of our equipment. And it's an honor to have him at the White House. We're going to have a lunch together. We're going to have a discussion, big discussion. We do a lot of trade with Turkey, and we're going to continue. We're going to do some additional trade. They want to buy F-16s, F-35s, and some other things, and we're going to talk to them about that. And we're just going to have, I think, a very interesting couple of hours. We're going to get a lot done. But I have great respect for this man, and we've had a very good relationship for a long time. If you remember, he led Pastor Brunson. He freed Pastor Brunson. Pastor Brunson was put in jail for 35 years before I got there. This was a group that should have stopped it, and the president, after I called him, released him, which was a great thing for our Christian community, our evangelical community. The evangelicals really wanted that. It was very important to him, so I always remembered that. But he released him from 35 years in prison. And Pastor Brunson now is healthy, happy, and well. And we're very happy about that. But it's a great honor to have the president of Turkey with us. And how are you?
Fine.
Say a few words.
And you?
Great guy.
On the margins of the United Nations General Assembly, and we are so pleased to making this official visit, both during his first term and also in his second term as the president of Mr. Trump. We indeed go through a very different time in terms of the relations between Turkey and USA. As he mentioned in his speech, we will be discussing many matters like F-16s and F-35. And we will also discuss our relations in terms of the Halkbank issue, and I certainly believe that we will be able to discuss all those matters. And with regards to the Halki seminary, we are ready to do our share. When I go back to Turkey, I will find a chance to discuss this matter with Mr. Bartolomeo.
First, Mr. President, I am very pleased that this visit actually coincides with the 80th UNGA. So I am very pleased to be here with my colleagues and friends. And as we have said, during the first term of your presidency and during your second term, we are able to carry Turkey and U.S. relations to a much different level and process. And as you've said, we have an opportunity here today to be able to discuss some of the issues regarding the F-35, the F-16, and also the Halkbank case, and we will have an opportunity to thoroughly discuss them. And based on what you have mentioned regarding the Heybeliada school, we are ready to do whatever we can that falls on our part, and I will, when I get back, try to discuss this issue with the esteemed Mr. Bartolomos to discuss how we can move forward on that.
Okay, very good. I would like to be able to do that. The Greek Orthodox Church was here, and they would really like to have some help. They need some help, and I said I'd mention it, and we appreciate it. So this is a tough man. This is a guy who's highly opinionated. Usually I don't like opinionated people, but I always like this one. but he's a tough one, and he does an amazing job in his country. And we've had tremendous relationships, both having to do with war and having to do with trade. And I guess today we're talking about both. I'd like to have him stop buying any oil from Russia while Russia continues this rampage against Ukraine. And they've been fighting. They've lost millions of lives already. And for what? You know, for what? It's disgraceful. And I said yesterday, let it keep going because their economy is absolutely terrible right now. And I think it's a shame that they're doing that, killing a lot of people unnecessarily. 7,818 people were killed last week, mostly military people, their people, and Ukrainians. More Russians, actually, than Ukraine, a little bit more. But it's such a waste of human life, and so he ought to stop. Putin ought to stop. And with that, we'll get to a little bit of a discussion. We're going to make some great trade deals for both countries. We do a lot of business with Turkey. They build great products. They build beautiful, great products, really fantastic manufacturers. And we buy a lot from them, and they buy a lot from us. Would you have any questions, please?
You repeatedly called out Obama and Biden administrations for their stupid decisions. One example you gave was the refusal to sell the Patriot missile defense systems to Turkey, which resulted in the expulsion of the country from the F-35 program. Now, you are known to be a great deal maker in Turkey. What can you do to undo this stupidity? Yes, CNN, sir.
CNN? Well, because you sounded like a nice guy, but CNN is fake news. I mean, but you sound like the real deal to me, so I'll answer the question. We're going to be discussing the Patriot system, which is the best system. We'll discuss that. We're going to discuss the F-35. We'll be discussing all of the things that you know about and that some of that you mentioned. And I think he'll be successful with buying the things he'd like to buy.
What concrete steps can you take?
Well, we'll have to see. We haven't even started yet. But I know he wants the F-35, and he's wanted that, and we're talking about that very seriously. And the F-16, we're in great shape. Certain other things he needed, as you know, and I'm going to see to it that we get that to him. He needs certain things, and we need certain things. And we're going to come to a conclusion. You'll know by the end of the day. Go ahead, please.
In the past, and you can also establish good relations with many leaders in the region. And how do you think you can cooperate in this matter? Well, I certainly believe in this. So we will be working together hand in hand, and I am certain, and I have no doubt whatsoever, that by working together, we will be resolving all those problems.
Mr. President, when are you planning?
Because I haven't learned this language yet. What did he say?
The gentleman was asking, Mr. President, you have referred to President Trump's peace efforts, and you have also contact with many leaders in the region. And what do you think that you can do about this? And Mr. President has said that, yes, I believe in the peace efforts that President Trump is leading, and together we will be able to overcome the challenges in the region.
I think it's true. He's got tremendous influence in the region. Yeah, please.
Mr. President, when are you planning to lift sanctions against Turkey?
Against sanctions against Turkey? Could be very soon.
Mr.
If we have a good meeting, almost immediately.
President Erdogan is removing tariffs on U.S. goods, and what impact it would be in U.S. production?
Where are you from?
Turkey.
I see. We have a lot of people from Turkey here. That's
We are
because I like the questions very much, actually. They're very nice questions. We'll see about tariffs. We're going to be talking about tariffs.
We already removed them.
Well, we're going to be talking about that.
Sanctions on Russia, even if not all NATO countries stop purchasing Russian oil?
We're going to be seeing about that. The NATO countries were disappointing in that regard, but they've been very amazing in other ways. They did, as you know, they went from 2% to 5% GDP, and that's a big step, and it's paid. I mean, they have the money there. And we're selling a tremendous amount of military equipment to NATO. We're selling. We're not giving like Biden did. we're selling it to NATO, and it's a lot. They're buying a lot, and I assume they're giving it to Ukraine. They could buy it for other reasons too, but I assume they're giving most of it to Ukraine. But they're buying highly sophisticated weaponry, and they're paying for it full price. And that's how we're involved. Biden gave $350 billion. Look, this war would have never started if I were president. If I were president, this war would never be happened. Would have never happened. Yeah.
Mr. President, I would like to ask about Gaza. Are you on the same page, Mr. Erdogan, for Palestine, Israel?
Well, I don't know his stance. I can't tell you about that. I just say that we want to get Gaza over with. I had a great meeting with the leaders of that area, of that region, generally speaking, the Middle East. We had a great meeting the other day at UNGA, as you know, and I think we're close to getting some kind of a deal done. Yeah, we want to get the hostages back. I have to get the hostages back. We're the ones that got the hostages, all of them that we have now. But it looks like there are 20 living hostages and probably 38 or so dead hostages. Pretty sad. And the parents of those dead souls, those dead, mostly men, boys, in many cases like literally boys, they want those bodies back so badly, as much as though they were alive. And so we had a very good meeting with the representatives of the most powerful countries in the Middle East, and I think we're going to be close to a deal.
That in the Ukrainian war and during the Israeli-Iran war, the airspace of the NATO countries is very fragile, and it needs to be stronger. And in that sense, Turkey being the second largest army in NATO, it needs to support its air force and air defense. How do you look at this issue in general as a NATO?
Well, we support them. I
it's
mean,
the eastern flank.
Yeah, we're in NATO, and you know they're paying now 5% of GDP. Nobody thought that was possible, and they agreed to that 6 months ago when I was there. And the relationship is very good. The NATO countries, with us, is the strongest it's ever been. We used to complain that they're paying 2%, but they're not paying. The United States was paying almost everything, and now they're paying 5%, and they paid. And that's trillions of dollars. You know, we're talking about trillions of dollars. And they're spending that, giving that money to us, and we are giving them great defensive, you know, the Patriots and all of the different javelins, all the different missile systems and everything else that they want. But it's, you know, it's trillions of dollars. So we appreciate that they did that. So they went from 2% to 5% of GDP, and that was something that nobody even would bring up. Biden should have brought it up a long time ago. Because under Biden, we paid $350 billion, and all it did is make things worse. So we'll see how it goes.
F-35s to Turkey, fighter jets, F-35s.
Yeah, we're talking about the fighter jets for Turkey. Yes, we are.
Are we going to see any steps going to be taken today about the issue, about the things that are going on in the Gaza, Palestine? Are we going to...
It could be today. Yeah, it could be today. We have a very strong dialogue going on with Saudi Arabia. With, I would say, you have 4 or 5 real leaders that are being good. As you know, I met with Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE. We met with Jordan. The King of Jordan was there. We had a really great meeting. I think a lot was determined at that meeting. And I have to meet with Israel, and I have to do that also. They know what I want, and I think we can get that one done. I hope we can get it done. A lot of people are dying. But we want the hostages back. We don't want them back 1 this week, 1 and 2 months from now, 3 later, and you know, like the way it's been going. We got them all back. We got a lot of them back. We got the American Alexander. We got the American hostages back. But we have now 20 plus 38 bodies, dead bodies, and we want them all back. And we want them back at one time.
President Erdogan will help to release the hostages?
Do I think what?
Do you think President Erdogan will have to release the hostages?
I don't know if he'll help in that. I don't really think we have. I don't think it'll be necessary in this case. I think we're going to be in a pretty good position. There are a lot of people that want that done. I met with great leaders. Look, you saw the people that were there, and great leaders. Egypt was also represented. We met with the leaders of that part of the world, and they want to see if they can get something done. And I'm going to have to tell Israel, let's go. We want to get the hostages back. Everybody wants to see that war over with, by the way. Everybody. So we're going to see what happens.
Mr. President, how do you see a joint initiative with President Erdogan to bring the President of Russia, Putin, and President Zelensky to the negotiating table?
Well, I can tell you that President Erdogan is very respected by both of them. Everybody respects Erdogan. They really respect Erdogan. I do. And I think he could have a big influence if he wants to. Right now, he's very neutral. He likes being neutral. So do I like being neutral. But he's somebody that, if he got involved, the best thing he could do is not buy oil and gas from Russia. If he did that, that would be probably the best thing. He knows Putin like I know Putin. I thought Putin, I settled, as you know, 7 wars, and it's probably more than that if you really want to know the real facts, but 7 wars, and I thought this would be among the easier ones to settle. But I'm very disappointed in Putin. And he's been fighting hard, he's been fighting long, and they lost millions, they lost like 1 million soldiers. And you know, with all of the heavy bombardment over the last 2 weeks, they've gained almost no land. Think of that. They've gained almost no land. And I'm not going to ever call anybody a paper tiger, but Russia spent millions and millions of dollars in bombs, missiles, ammunition, and lives, their lives. And they've gained virtually no land. I think it's time to stop. I really do.
Mr. President, a few months ago, you met with Aliyev and Pashinyan. Can you follow up?
To where?
You met with Aliyev and Pashinyan, Azerbaijan President Aliyev and Pashinyan. Can you follow up on what you want to say about current process?
No, I can't. I like this guy. I like him. He's from CNN. Fake news, the worst fake news, but I like him. So it's CNN Turkey. I'll get Brian. Go.
Syria has been a major issue between the 2 countries for the past decade. And you said the future to Syria is in Erdogan's hands back in, I think, December and January. And the countries are in the process of integrating little fractures into the main government. When do you want to see that happen?
Well, I think President Erdogan is the one responsible for Syria, for the successful fight in ridding Syria of its past leader. And I think this man is responsible. He doesn't take the responsibility, but it's actually a great achievement. They've been trying to do it for 2,000 years. I said, he does it. He did it. I mean, they're your surrogates. I think you should take the credit for it. I told him, take the credit. For 2,000 years, you've been trying to take over Syria. He took over Syria, and he doesn't want to take the credit. You know, all of those people are his surrogates. But the leader of Syria, the new leader, as you know, I took sanctions off in order to let them breathe, because the sanctions were very strong. But I think we should have a major announcement today. He was responsible for that victory. It was a victory for Turkey, because they've been fighting, as you know, for like 1,000 years. And it never went, you know, it was back and forth, but he's responsible for that. So he would have a lot to say with respect to Syria. But at his request, I took, and the request also of the King of Saudi Arabia, it's very interesting, and Qatar, they said if you could take the sanctions. We had very strong sanctions. They couldn't have lived with those sanctions, and I took them off to give them a chance to breathe. But the president was one of the people that was responsible for that. He asked me to do it. I did it.
Mr. President, furloughs are very typical when the government
why is the administration directing federal layoffs of federal workers this time around?
Well, this is all caused by the Democrats. They asked us to do something that's totally unreasonable. They never change. They want to give money away to illegally, people that entered our country illegally. They want to give them massive federal money. And we don't want to do that because it means everyone's going to just keep pouring back. Right now we have absolutely perfect borders like you haven't seen in many years. Even better than I had great borders during my 4 years, but these borders are stone cold closed. You can only come into our country legally now. But the Democrats want to give it all away. They want to open up the borders. Take a look at that. Big thing. They want to open borders again after what we're going through now, getting rid of prisoners, getting rid of all of these people dropped out from mental institutions, drug dealers, drug addicts, everything. They're putting everybody into our country. It's all ended now. But this is what Schumer wants. This is what the Democrats want. They want to have, and they want to take our money. We're doing well because of tariffs. We're doing unbelievable. We're making more money than we ever have made. And by the way, we're going to take some of that tariff money that we made, just to get off the subject for a second. We're going to take some of that tariff money that we made. We're going to give it to our farmers, who are, for a little while, going to be hurt until it kicks in. The tariffs kick into their benefit. So we're going to make sure that our farmers are in great shape because we're taking in a lot of money. We're finding, the other day, it was very interesting, they found $31 billion. They said, sir, we found 31. I said, you mean positively, right? They said, yeah, 31 million more than we knew. And they said, we don't know where it came from. I said, check the tariff shelf. They came back the following morning. They said, you're right, sir, it came from the tariffs. We've never seen anything like this. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking some money from all of the tariff money that we've taken, and we're going to distribute it to our farmers until the tariffs kick into their benefit, which ultimately the farmers are going to be making a fortune. But it's a process of, it has to kick in. All right, maybe one more.
There was another shooting at an ICE facility in Texas yesterday.
Terrible.
Detainees were killed. The FBI director posted on social media bullets that were engraved with the message anti-ICE.
Right.
He just posted another thing on social media saying they recovered a handwritten note from the subject that read, hopefully this will give ICE agents real terror to think, is there a sniper with AP rounds on that roof? Who do you hold responsible for the uptick in left-wing violence in the country?
Radical left rhetoric. The radical left is causing the problem. They're out of control. They're saying things, and they're really dumb people. I mean, I look at Crockett. I look at some of these people. They're very low IQ people, actually. But the radical left is causing this problem, not the right, the radical left. And it's going to get worse, and ultimately it's going to go back on them. I mean, bad things happen when they play these games. And I'll give you a little clue. The right is a lot tougher than the left. But the right's not doing this. They're not doing it, and they better not get them energized because it won't be good for the left. And I don't want to see that happen either. I'm the president of all the people. But the radical left is causing this. Radical left Democrats are causing this problem, and it gets worse. It gets worse, and it'll be a point where other people won't take it anymore, and that will not be good for the radical left, and we don't want that. Okay, thank you.
Mr. President, it seems like an indictment of James Comey is imminent. Would this be the first step in accountability for pushing the hoax of Russia, along with Barack Obama involved as well?
Well, I can't tell you what's going to happen because I don't know. You have very professional people headed up by the Attorney General and Todd Blanche and Lindsay Halligan, who's very smart, good lawyer, very good lawyer. They're going to make a determination. I'm not making that determination. I think I'd be allowed to get involved if I want, but I don't really choose to do so. I can only say that Comey's a bad person. He's a sick person. I think he's a sick guy, actually. He did terrible things at the FBI. And but I don't know. I have no idea what's going to happen. Thank you very much, everybody.
All right, so we have been listening to President Donald Trump and President Recep Tayyip Erdogan take questions from the media inside the Oval Office before starting their official bilateral meeting. So the Turkish president and the US president took questions on a wide range of issues from reporters present inside the Oval Office. And if I can describe the environment over there, especially when it comes to the relationship between the two leaders at the Oval Office, then I have to say it was very positive. President Donald Trump was praising President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, calling him a tough guy, praising his leadership back home in his country. And also we heard similar sentiments from the Turkish president towards Donald Trump. Then, of course, we saw the two leaders take many different questions from reporters on a wide range of issues, from Syria to the war in Russia and Ukraine, and of course about the developments in Gaza right now. So certainly Gaza is not only the only issue present on the table. Defense ties between the two countries were also center at that Oval Office interaction with the media. And remember, Turkey was removed from the US-led F-35 fighter jet program back in 2019 after purchasing Russia's S-400 missile defense system. And Ankara has repeatedly said that it paid $1.4 billion for those jets it never received. And President Erdogan basically is expected to push for either those aircraft to be delivered or for significant upgrades to Turkey's F-16 fleet. So certainly Ankara is definitely hoping for some sort of deal to come out of the talks that are underway at the Oval Office in the White House right now. Another major point of discussion that we saw at the Oval Office was Syria. The American president spoke about the developments in Syria and the role of Turkey. So the Turkish president was, the American president Donald Trump was basically praising Turkey's efforts in Syria, calling it an achievement for the Turkish president, what happened in December of last year. So certainly it seems that this meeting, the environment at the Oval Office a few moments ago when the two leaders were interacting with the media, was a very positive one. And hopefully in the next few hours we will be learning more about what exactly was discussed when the two leaders started their official bilateral meeting. Just a quick reminder to our audience that the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is at the Oval Office right now with top members from his government. We saw the Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan there. We also saw the Turkish Communications Director Burhanettin Duran accompanying the Turkish President there. And of course, from the American side, we saw Marco Rubio, US's ambassador to Turkey, Tom Barak, was also present in that meeting right now, and I believe the meeting is underway as of now. So a crucial development, a critical moment for the ties between Ankara and Washington. Let's discuss this further. Joining me now here is Rich Outzen. He's a foreign policy analyst. Rich, thank you very much once again for being with us. So I was trying to update you on what the two leaders are saying throughout this interaction with the media at the Oval Office. And as I said, if there's one word that could describe this interaction, that I would say a positive interaction, because Donald Trump kept praising President Erdogan again and again. In fact, when he started talking to the media, he was all about praising President Erdogan, and then even when he was being asked questions by reporters about a range of different topics, he kept saying President Erdogan is an effective leader. It plays a crucial role. So what do you make of this?
I expected very much that Trump would reprise the earlier positive statements that he had said. He's encouraging Turkey's proactive stance in Syria and in Ukraine and elsewhere. This fits with the America First foreign policy that he's pursuing, because the United States doesn't want to manage the world directly. It needs strong allies, and he sees Turkey as a strong ally in the region, one that can help stabilize Ukraine, that can help stabilize Syria. Now, they didn't talk about some of the more problematic areas. There are some disagreements about Gaza, but the note that they struck on Gaza, I think, in this initial discussion was also quite positive. They both said, we want this to end, or some version of that. So I think they hit all the right notes. The devil's in the details, so we'll wait and see the session that follows this, where you have all the ministers sitting around a table, again, going over all the portfolios that they've agreed to discuss, and there'll be some wins that get announced, and there'll be some areas maybe that haven't been fully, all the T's crossed and all the I's dotted. So I don't suspect we're going to have a packed communique that comes out of this that says we fixed everything. But I think we're going to get an 80% solution on the outstanding portfolios between the two countries.
Do you think we might get a roadmap which basically highlights how we're going to fix things?
Yes.
Okay, so that's possible.
I think that's a very good way to phrase it. And by the way, having worked with the Turkish government as a member of the United States government on a dozen occasions, negotiating texts and agreements and stuff, it's always a question of roadmap. We need at least to have a common understanding of where we're going. And that's what's been so frustrating over the last 4 years, certainly in the relationship, is no definitive vision shaping. And I think what we're going to see come out of this is a roadmap, as you say, an ability to shape. If we don't have all these things fixed today, what's the roadmap to get there? That's a good way to put it.
Right, and of course, let's talk about the war in Russia, the war in Ukraine right now, Russia's war in Ukraine, rather.
Yep.
So Turkey, of course, when you look at Turkey's stance, I think it has positioned itself as both a NATO ally and also a mediator, because remember, it was Turkey that brokered that grain deal between Russia and Ukraine. So, and we heard, of course, the American president also talk about the war in Ukraine right now. So how do you think Turkey playing a role when it comes to fostering peace between the warring sides?
Yeah. Well, Turkey, we should remember, at a time very shortly after the Russian invasion of Crimea, this was the first invasion of Ukraine back in 2014, immediately started saying, how can we bolster with lethal means the Ukrainian ability to defend itself? And that has continued all the way through, with drones, with armored vehicles, with ammunition. So the first part of Turkey's response in Ukraine has been a strong and firm recognition of Ukrainian sovereignty and a commitment to strengthening its abilities to defend itself. Yet that did not take it into the same position as Europe, which was much more reticent about the lethal aid early on, but would not talk to Russia. This is what makes Ankara so different, what makes Erdogan so different. And he's willing to talk to the Russians even while he's providing the Ukrainians the means to defend themselves by killing Russian soldiers. This is the politics of Eurasia. It's hardball. And the hardball that says, I still want to trade with Russia, I still want to negotiate with Russia, but by no means am I going to let Russia strangle Ukraine, is what makes Turkey such a uniquely powerful player in this equation. I think it's close to what you see President Trump inching towards now, too. President Trump
Rich, this is how I'm looking at the developments right now. I believe President Trump has already tried and tested many things with President Putin, right? He tried to praise him. He tried to invite him to his own country, Alaska. They met, for a face-to-face meeting. Of course, at the time, everyone was praising this meeting, that something concrete might come out about the war in Ukraine, but all we got was nothing. In fact, over the past few weeks, the situation has only worsened in Ukraine right now. So do you think this is an opportunity for President Trump to rely on Turkey when it comes to ending the war, or is it something else?
Well, I think to work with Turkey rather than to rely on, I mean, obviously he'll rely on Turkish support for this new stance, but there is a new stance. And by the way, I had said for several years, I thought that when he came into office, if he came into office for a second term, that his approach would be to say, here's the compromise I'm willing to shape. And that first he would pressure Ukraine and say, take this or you're on your own. And then he would go to Putin and say, take this or I'm going to double and triple down on the support I give to Ukraine and allow them to inflict much greater price and punishment on you. Now, it took longer than I thought it would for him to get to that second part of it, but I think what we're seeing is the evolution of the Trump policy on Russia now to one that is more stick and less carrot. As you say, he's tried the carrot. He's tried to say, Putin, look, I'm more willing than just about anybody else to talk with you and to try to find a compromise. By the way, that is a huge political price in the United States as well. I think we're starting to see now when he said this past week that Ukraine might take back all of its territory.
That was a major U-turn.
This is a major rhetorical signal that the United States, and by the way, also this deal where we are selling equipment to the Ukraine or to the Europeans, knowing that they're going to then hand that to the Ukrainians. We are slowly inching towards raising the costs for Russia, and I think that together with the Turkish, approach has been the same, arm Ukraine while talking to Russia. We're going to be lined up and putting more pressure, and hopefully that will, in the end, push Putin to where he hasn't gone so far.
Rich, just one quick question here, because certainly a lot of developments are taking place right now. And I want to ask you about Ukraine and the ongoing developments over there right now. And as far as Donald Trump's U-turn is concerned, just yesterday at the United Nations on the sidelines, I asked the Hungarian foreign minister about Donald Trump's U-turn. And what does he think about American credibility versus European credibility when it comes to security guarantees to Ukraine? And, he basically told me that if there's one person that can end the war, then still that person is Donald Trump. So based on what Donald Trump has seen unfold as far as the war in Ukraine is concerned, do you think he's going to stick to this U-turn now and make it America's concrete policy, or we might see another U-turn later on?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, and it's hard to predict the future when we're talking about what any politician will do. But I think I understand the geopolitical logic that's driving Trump on this one. It's not out of some bromance with Putin, which he definitely doesn't have. And it's not out of really wanting to wash his hands of NATO or of Ukraine, which some of his opponents have said for a long time. At the end of the day, this man is a man who is repelled by war and wants to end wars. I think now he's come to a fundamental conclusion that Putin has no intention of ending the war unless it is through the occupation and the extinguishing of the Ukrainian state. Once he's understood that, and I think he has, Trump's going to do everything he can now to sustain the existence of Ukrainian sovereignty, and that means to me he's
because if Putin wins, it's a major defeat for Donald Trump
and for Recep Tayyip Erdogan and for all of Europe, right? And so I don't think that he's willing to countenance that. As a result, I think what we're going to see is he's going to increase the amount of resources, the amount of rhetorical support, and the amount of intelligence support. All of that is going to increase to Ukraine. I don't see that changing. I think this is he let this game play out. How long are we into the presidency now? About 8 months. 8 months is long enough. I think he's made his judgment about Putin and Ukraine. And my belief is now he's going to slowly increase the pressure until Putin says, okay, this is not worth, the juice is not worth the squeeze.
Fascinating insights, Rich. Thanks very much for joining me here. Now we'll get an update from the White House. TRT World's Kubra Akkoç is there. Kubra, I understand you got the opportunity to ask a question to the American president. Tell us more about that.
Well, exactly. I asked U.S. President Donald Trump about Ukraine. I asked him how he sees a potential joint initiative with President Erdogan when it comes to bringing the President Putin and President Zelensky to the negotiating table. And he praised Erdogan. He praised President Erdogan's efforts when it comes to peacemaking, to bring a peaceful end to the conflict in Ukraine. But he told me that he is very disappointed in Vladimir Putin. So this is what you've been talking about. This is the real U-turn that Trump has been talking about. He's saying now that he's very disappointed in Putin, so that suggesting meetings with Putin and Zelensky. Even he was hinting there can be a four-way meeting where Turkish president would be joining. That isn't looking very likely happening soon. Also, I was in that Oval Office. It was a very unique atmosphere, and it was a very warm environment as well. J.D. Vance, the Vice President, was there. Secretary of State Marco Rubio was there. And of course, Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan and Turkish Spy Chief Ibrahim Kalın was there. And the leaders' interactions were very warm. And of course, there was this question of Gaza. We know that when it comes to boosting bilateral ties between Türkiye and the U.S., Gaza remains a major sticking point. So Donald Trump was asked about whether will they be on the same page when it comes to Gaza. He said we need to wait and see, and he also talked about that they had a great meeting at the UNGA, at the UN headquarters during this week, and he thinks that there can be a deal done very soon. But of course we know that this is Trump. This is one of the most unconventional presidents in modern history. He usually says that there can be deals done when it comes to tariffs, when it comes to bringing an end to the conflict in Gaza, conflict in Ukraine. But again, that was Trump's highlight out of this briefing with the press at the Oval Office during his bilateral meeting with President Erdogan. Right now, they're going to be conducting a work meeting over lunch. Then President Trump will be saying goodbye to President Erdogan from the stakeout location right behind us from the Oval Office, and will continue to bring you the latest.
Fascinating insights there, Kubra. Stay with us because, of course, Russia and Ukraine is going to be on the top of the agenda. Of course, the war in Gaza is also going to be discussed. We already saw both leaders basically comment on that inside the Oval Office when they were interacting with the media. But beyond that, I think trade is also of paramount importance because the Trump administration, for example, has revived its ambitious goal of boosting bilateral trade to $100 billion annually, which is basically more than triple the current volume of about $30 billion. So what does this meeting mean for the future of economic ties and trade ties between the two countries, Kubra?
Yes, well, both presidents have long been pledging to boost cooperation when it comes to trade. We know that there is this ambitious target of $100 billion in bilateral trade. Both sides have been signaling that target is within reach. We know that during all this Trump's tariff saga, Turkey was among the countries that was least affected by different ratios of tariffs. And right now that ratio currently stands at 15%. And also recently, Turkish president and also the Turkish government lifted some tariffs on some U.S. goods. So that's a good sign. That's a good signal. It was also Donald Trump was asked about that during the Oval Office meeting as well. He said that he is seeing these signs as positive signs, of course, and he is also looking forward to boost bilateral trade with Turkey. And he says it's an indispensable ally.
That's Kubra Koç live for us from the White House. Kubra, thank you very much indeed. So a crucial meeting is underway at the White House right now. Both President Donald Trump and Recep Tayyip Erdogan are holding their bilateral talks. President Erdogan is inside the White House along with top members of his government. We saw the Turkish foreign minister in his delegation, and of course the communications director Burhanettin Duran is also there. So they'll be talking some critical issues right now. We are expecting to hear more about their meeting once their meeting ends, and of course the Oval Office meeting is not the only time they will be conducting these bilateral talks, because followed by this Oval Office meeting, they'll also be holding a bilateral lunch inside the White House. Here on TRT World, we'll be keeping you up to speed on all the latest developments coming out of the White House. For now, back to Istanbul.
Thank you very much, Jafar Hasnan, to you and your guests for breaking that all down for us. That meeting between Donald Trump and President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. We're going to get more on this with our editor-at-large, Yusuf Erim. He's here with me in studio. And Yusuf, when we saw them sitting in the White House, Trump only had praise for President Erdogan, saying that he has great respect for him, that the president is highly respected both in his own country. He's done so much. And Jafar mentioned there that there are so many critical issues to be discussed here. And both these men actually started out with talking about the defense sector, the F-16s, F-35s. There's so much between these two countries that they are looking forward to. Trump actually saying, we will discuss Patriot defense systems, saying, I know President Erdogan, wants the F-35 and we're in great shape with the F-16. He needs certain things and we need certain things, and you will know about it at the end of the day. So this could be something very positive for Turkey going forward.
Definitely, definitely. Before I answer that question, how many Trump meet and greets have we watched? I mean, I would say this is probably one of the most cordial and smoothest that I've seen, because Trump likes to go off the cuff, and a lot of leaders can't handle that, but there was tremendous amount of bilateral and mutual respect by both leaders for each other. So as one of the smoothest meet and greets that I've seen at the White House. Now, getting back to defense, yes, there's a tremendous area for cooperation, a lot of space for cooperation, a lot of space for acquisition, weapons acquisitions. Obviously, the Turks have talked about the F-35. I mean, as I stated before, yes, it's important, but is it as important as it was 5 years ago? No, it's not as important as it is 5 years ago. But if Erdogan gets a good deal at a good price and he can pick up these F-35s, he'll do it. He'll do it. Of course, he wants to strengthen his military. I mean, Turkey is in a very, very tough region. And if the opportunity presents itself, he'll pick it up. But it's not a do or die like it was. So there's a lot to be discussed there. F-16s, Turkey is also interested in that. Hopefully, we'll see something come out of that. As I stated before, there's been deals between Turkish companies and American companies with the Turks joint producing on American soil, especially regarding, I believe it was 120 millimeter mortar shells. These are very important. Ukraine uses a lot of these, and the stock throughout the world right now, especially inventory or dead stock that can immediately be sent to Ukraine, has been tremendously depleted. So that's very important. Other types of shells with larger calibers and whatnot, these can be developed together. So the war in Ukraine has really drained NATO's stock. So Turkey is one of the countries, especially inside the Western Alliance, that has the capacity to be able to produce these types of weapons at scale. So their drone industry, obviously everyone knows about that, but besides the drone industry, there's a lot of other things that Turkey does well. It does anti-drone very well. It does electronic warfare very well. It does small munitions very well. It does conventional arms very well. And it looks like a lot more products are going to be added to that going forward as well. And that might be something that the United States wants to explore, because the ability of a country to replenish its inventory with its local manufacturing or close partnerships via manufacturing, we're seeing that's becoming very important, because we're seeing a shift now to more a war of attrition style of fighting. We're seeing this in Ukraine. We're seeing Israel try this as well. And a country's ability to replenish stocks very, very quickly and be able to go through a protracted war could be the difference between victory or defeat.
Absolutely. And you mentioned there, if Erdogan gets a good deal and a good price, and we know that Donald Trump loves a good deal. His whole book, everybody does, you're right. But it does make me wonder then how important that personal relationship is between these two men in getting a good deal for either one of them.
Look, we saw glimpses or little clues inside of their little conversation there about how good the personal relationship is. Trump touched on Pastor Brunson. That was an issue that was very important to Trump's base back then. He said we had to talk with Erdogan. Erdogan helped resolve this issue. He said, I personally thank him. It was very important to evangelical Christians. And that's an important part of Trump's base. So it seemed an issue that was very near and dear to him. Erdogan did what he could. It was a case that was being tried in Turkish court, and thankfully it ended in a positive manner where it didn't hurt the bilateral relationship. We saw some thanks there. Obviously, there's some joking around about how things played out in Syria. Trump keeps insisting that Erdogan won in Syria, that it was his doing. Erdogan says, well, it really wasn't me. What's the truth? Who's correct there? That's probably, the truth probably is something between Erdogan and Shara that only the two of them know, Erdogan's role in there. But all joking aside, Turkey played an important role since at least 2016, when they were physically across the border in August, when they first launched Operation Euphrates Shield and pushed Daesh back off of its Turkish border. So they did play a critical role. How much in that final push by al-Shara to Damascus, that remains to be seen. But if Turkey didn't enter Syria in August 2016, there might not be that opportunity for al-Shara to take Damascus. So I think maybe Trump is more highlighting that. One more thing I think was very important, that it's more of a niche issue, and it kind of slipped under the radar, but he talked about the Halka Theological School. He mentioned Patriarch Bartholomew of Istanbul coming and visiting him in Washington and asking him for help regarding this. And I wanted to give a little background, because I think this is a very important issue. This came off the back of the Patriarch of Jerusalem, Theophilos, visiting Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. He came, he asked him for help in protecting the Christians of Jerusalem. And this is a role that, whether it be today Erdogan, whether it be historically the Ottoman Sultan, or before that, going back to the Pact of Umar, a deal made between the Muslims and the non-Muslims of Jerusalem when there was a change in power there, that the powerful Muslim ruler had always guaranteed the protection of the Christians of Jerusalem. And I kind of felt like this was a retaliation by Netanyahu or by the Greeks to have Bartholomew go and visit Trump. But it's something that Trump asks of Erdogan. Erdogan has always placed tremendous importance on religious freedom of ethnic minorities, whether it's the ethnic minorities in his country, whether it's Syria's Christians, whether it's Jerusalem's Christians. So I think that's something that there's going to be some discussion, but President Trump was probably going to be happy that Erdogan heard him out, and he's probably going to do something about it in the future, I expect.
Thank you very much for putting that all in context for us. Yusuf, you're going to stay with us in studio. And just a reminder to our viewers that the Turkish President Erdogan and the US President Donald Trump have met at the White House after 6 years. And during a press briefing we were watching just a short while ago at the Oval Office, Trump described the Turkish president as a tough negotiator. President Erdogan says F-16 and F-35 fighter jets will be discussed during the meeting.
We are realizing our visit on the margins of the United Nations General Assembly, and we are so pleased to making this official visit, both during his first term and also in his second term as the president of Mr. Trump. We indeed go through a very different time in terms of the relations between Turkey and USA. As he mentioned in his speech, we will be discussing many matters like F-16s and F-35.
Let's go now to the White House and speak to our correspondent, Craig Boswell. So, Craig, we watched that press conference between Trump and President Erdogan. Very cordial, but a flurry of questions, of course, coming from the media. There's plenty that they wanted to know. But just take us through what happened and also what happens next as the meeting continues between these two leaders and their delegations.
Exactly. Picking up on what your guest noted in the kind of the atmosphere in this Oval Office meeting between President Trump and President Erdogan, your guest even noticed how smooth this meeting was going. Something and lighter moments that we often don't see in these Oval Office settings like this. It was almost a jovial setting at times when U.S. President Donald Trump even referenced a CNN reporter saying, "I like this guy, even though he works for CNN." That kind of gets to the atmosphere that is taking place, this positive atmosphere that was taking place there in the Oval Office. Now, on business matters, look, no shortage of business that these two men are discussing. They brought some things to light here. Number one, on Syria, this got my attention. Trump said there would likely be a major announcement today. You recall that there was this discussion between U.S. President Donald Trump and President Erdogan back some time ago when President Trump decided to lift sanctions off of Syria. President Trump noted that today during this meeting, looking over at President Erdogan, saying, "I credit this guy for bringing that to my attention, and I decided to lift those sanctions because of our conversations." And he went on to say that President Erdogan should take credit for Syria getting back on the world stage. Now, a couple of other things to mention on Russia, Ukraine. It was Donald Trump who was saying that it is President Erdogan that is respected by both Russia, respected by both Ukraine and Russia, and is also neutral in this matter. The president said he wishes he could be neutral, thought of himself as neutral, but he went on to kind of clarify after that. He said, "But I think that he needs to stop buying Russian energy." That is one of the things that Donald Trump has been mentioning over and over again, time and time again. He says he's very disappointed in NATO. He's very disappointed in European nations for the continuing buying of Russian energy. That includes liquefied natural gas. One of the other things got my attention. Donald Trump said, if we have a good meeting, maybe we'll talk about tariffs. This gets to the strengthening of economic ties between the two countries. Before heading into this meeting, Turkey removed those sanctions not sanctions rather, but tariffs on many of these U.S. products from cars to fruit. The U.S. still at this point maintaining a 15% tariffs that were announced these going back to April 2nd, the so-called Liberation Day. We could have some movement along those lines. Again, that comes under this umbrella of the strengthening of already what appear to be pretty strong U.S.-Turkey ties, strengthening the economic partnership between these two men. He said they talked about Patriot missile systems. We may have something to announce on the Patriot missile systems. And of course, they said they will be discussing the F-35s. President Trump suggesting that there'll be a positive resolution of this particular matter, as well as the sale of GE aircraft and the F-16. We're talking about multi-billion dollars worth of deals. Again, we've noted the transactional kind of just how Donald Trump is transactional. So he looks to get something, and he has gotten things from the President Erdogan. And so now these two men will see what else they can get to agree on to move forward, and we may be hearing some of that even later on this afternoon. And as one of your guests pointed out, the longer this meeting goes, even though it started late, the longer this meeting goes, the likelihood that even more positive things will likely be coming out of it. Back to you.
And Craig, when you talk about positive resolutions, I would imagine that President Erdogan, one of the things he would like a positive resolution on is the continuing war in Gaza. That will certainly be something that they are going to discuss. And I imagine would follow the discussion from earlier this week that President Trump had, not just with President Erdogan, but as well as from other Muslim majority countries and Arab leaders from the region, which Trump himself described as being very positive. The U.S. envoy, Steve Witkoff, said he even hoped that within the coming days there would be a ceasefire agreement to this. But it is something that President Erdogan has championed, the rights of Palestinians, and I'm sure it's something that he will definitely be discussing with President Trump and hoping that it will help Trump also see the view from the Palestinian side and also push Benjamin Netanyahu, who he's going to meet next week, to actually end this war.
Exactly, and this is a major portion of these discussions today. It's also a potential major stumbling block if, in fact, Donald Trump were to be not being able to be moved off of some of his stances in this region. But look, as you pointed out, that it is U.S. President Donald Trump and even President Erdogan that had said that meetings at the UN were both productive, according to the U.S. side, and fruitful, according to President Erdogan. And of course, there's this 21-point plan that was discussed at the UN. This is being called the Trump plan, and this is not an Israeli plan. This is a Trump plan that is being discussed, and there was some, according to Steve Witkoff, the UN envoy, very good reception to this plan. So that's going to be part of the discussions here. But there's also this pressure on the U.S. president to maybe pressure Israel a little bit more. We've heard questions about that, so you may that is likely going to be part of this discussion. That while the U.S. might believe that it is Israel that's increasingly isolated or mostly isolated, it's the U.S. that has become increasingly isolated on the world stage and refusing to go along or refusing to recognize a Palestinian state. This not recognizing of this two-state solution. It is the U.S. that is at odds now with a majority of nations on this. So there's going to be discussions along that. How can President Erdogan maybe shift the tone a little bit from the U.S. president? Maybe he can get the U.S. president to shift the tone towards Israeli President Benjamin Netanyahu, as you alluded to that. It is Benjamin Netanyahu that will be at the White House for meetings on Monday. That is going to be a very, very significant meeting because now we're talking about looking forward here. That is the thing is we're going to be looking forward. What comes out of that will likely be set in motion as to what comes out of this meeting today. How can President Erdogan kind of help President Donald Trump kind of see things potentially a little bit differently and maybe ramp up that pressure on the Israeli Prime Minister? I remember when Donald Trump was with the British Prime Minister on his two-day state visit, the president was asked about that. Why aren't you using your leverage? And the president deferred, saying he just wants to see the hostages released. Not sure he can defer that kind of question if, in fact, President Erdogan puts it to him just like that. The president's not going to be able to say, well, we want to see the hostages out. No, he's going to have to come with a very forthright discussion. And so that kind of sets the stage to Monday, which is under the umbrella of what happens next. And that is where we want to see movement. That is where the world is looking at this meeting and wanting to see movement and trying to stop this Israeli war machine, this Israeli assault on Gaza, that's onslaught that just continues and continues and continues, and try to get some type of resolution to that, get humanitarian aid into this region and resolve all of this. So that is what we're going to be looking forward to in the future. Back to you.
Craig Boswell there in the U.S. Capitol. Thank you so much, Craig. Well, Turkish foreign policy remains of central importance to regional security in the Middle East, from Syria to the broader fight against terrorism. As global dynamics shift, Ankara's engagement with partners like the United States is taking on renewed importance. Here's a closer look at the key areas shaping Türkiye-US relations.
A key focus of Türkiye-US relation is Turkey's active diplomacy in the Middle East, particularly over the Palestinian issue. President Erdogan has consistently called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and urged stronger Ankara-Washington collaboration to secure one, along with a sustainable peace. Turkey consistently emphasizes its support for Syria's territorial integrity and stability. Following the fall of the Assad regime, Ankara has developed close cooperation with the new Damascus administration. In response to this shift, the U.S. has also reaffirmed its commitment to Syria's unity, appointing Ambassador Tom Barrack as both U.S. Ambassador to Turkey and Special Envoy for Syria. Counterterrorism remains a key pillar of Turkey-US ties. Tensions still exist over US support of the YPG terror group in Syria, but in early 2025, intelligence sharing resumed and joint security talks restarted under NATO. Ankara and Washington are embracing a more pragmatic, threat-focused partnership, setting aside differences to counter terror across the region.
Let's continue with our editor-at-large, Yusuf Erim. He's here with me in studio. And Yusuf, when we talk about a pragmatic relationship between the United States and Turkey when it comes to Syria, how can these countries support each other? Because it does seem that they would have different goals in Syria, especially in the past, but now in a post-Assad era. What do they both want there?
I think Syria is the biggest difference between first-term Trump and second-term Trump, and how the U.S.-Turkey relationship will be under both different these different terms. Obviously, Syria was something that Trump inherited. He inherited a lot of Obama policies. Probably the biggest foreign policy blunder by the United States in its relationship with Turkey was that partnership that Obama formed with the YPG under his envoy, Brett McGurk. So that was something that Trump inherited in his first term. And it came with a lot of baggage, and that obviously strained the relationship at times, regardless of the good personal relationship that Erdogan and Trump had. But now with the liberation of Syria, Trump's free of those shackles. He doesn't have that baggage from previous administrations, and much of what's going on right now, either Erdogan has shaped or Trump has shaped on some issues. So they're more working with things that geopolitically are more aligned with their views. Now, when we look at Syria right now, and again, I was talking about them joking about who helped al-Shara take, Trump believes it's Erdogan, Erdogan says no, and that's all joking aside. Going forward, there's a tremendous amount of help Turkey can give, because when the Europeans look at Syria right now, they're looking at it as a new market that there can be investment in, help rebuilding. The Americans see it as an opportunity as well, an opportunity for a country that has traditionally been an adversary, also a market for it as well, hoping for stability. But when Turkey looks at Syria, it doesn't look at it as just an economic opportunity. I mean, there's still 4 million Syrians in Turkey, so there's this brotherhood bond over the years. It's its national security. It's its border. There's, I believe, a 911-kilometer border between Turkey and Syria. So that's a serious border. So Turkey has a lot of skin in the game, and it has serious interests in Syria. So again, if Trump is going to work to get Syria stable, and this is important not only for Turkey but also the rest of the region, a stable Syria. First, it ends that Shia land bridge that the Israelis were concerned about. Again, regardless of ending that land bridge, Netanyahu's bombed Syria over 800 times. How many times has al-Shara retaliated? Zero retaliation. So al-Shara is messaging and posturing peace. He's saying, I don't want war. I don't want to deal with you guys. I'm interested in rebuilding my country. Erdogan wants to help him. He convinced Trump to get on board and help him. He said, lift these sanctions. Let's help rebuild. It seems that the Arab world, especially the Gulf monarchies, seem keen to help as well. So this is a process, but the major baby steps have been taken. And if Israel decides not to meddle or intervene in Syria, I think this coalition between the U.S., Turkey, the Gulf countries together can really help boost Syria going forward and speeding up that rebuilding process.
I want to talk quickly about sanctions, because something that President Trump mentioned was the lifting of CAATSA sanctions on Turkey. Just explain to our viewers what those sanctions are, and if they are lifted by the United States, how it would impact Turkey.
Well, first of all, if they were lifted a couple of years ago, I think it would have been a huge positive impact. I think Turkey has learned to deal with those sanctions. Again, don't get me wrong, Turkey would be very happy if those sanctions are lifted. But it's learned to deal with those sanctions. It's not the massive detrimental impact that it had when they were first levied upon the Turkish Secretariat of Defense. So that part's gone. But These sanctions were placed because of the purchase of the S-400s, the anti-air defense systems, Russian-made ones. And when you open up CATSA as an abbreviation, it's Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions and Tariffs Act. What's sad is that it's a NATO ally, Türkiye, but yet it's being slapped with sanctions that directly says America's adversaries. That's absurd. It's something that should have never happened. I think the political atmosphere in U.S. Congress at that time, especially with what was happening with Syria, which is something that we talked about, I think that atmosphere, the charged atmosphere, the way Turkey was being presented, the PR campaign against Erdogan at the time, the whole narrative around the YPG or the SDF, whatever you want to call them, I think that political atmosphere was leveraged by certain actors who wanted to see Turkey get sanctioned. They put a lot of pressure on Donald Trump to sanction Turkey. He did what he could to try to, with presidential waivers of the sanctions, but it just got to a point where it was a battle that he couldn't expend more political capital on. And I definitely think he unwillingly had to sanction Turkey for that. But it strained the relationship, but it didn't break the relationship. And Erdogan was able to compartmentalize that. I think he understood that this is something Trump didn't want to do, but his hand was politically forced to do so. The relationship has endured, but I think sanctions will be lifted, hopefully during this Trump administration in the next 3 years. I don't think it'll happen anytime soon. I would be surprised if it does happen anytime soon. But we're in a much better place today on that issue than we were a year ago. I can say that.
Yeah, and it certainly helps that these two do have a very good relationship. Yeah. Yusuf, we'll continue this discussion shortly, but we're going to take our viewers back now to Jafar Hasnan. He's in Washington, D.C. for more on this meeting between the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Donald Trump.
Thank you very much, Yashini. I think it's important to remind our audience that for President Donald Trump, this meeting is about reinforcing America's position in this world right now, limiting Russian and Chinese influence as well, and basically showing America's strength in the region. But when you look at the Turkish president, I believe that for the Turkish president, it's about securing defense deals, reinforcing economic ties and bilateral relationship between the two countries, and very importantly, putting Gaza firmly on the global agenda. So as the two leaders are meeting inside the Oval Office right now, I believe all these topics are being discussed between them. So the big question is whether today's meeting leads to real policy breakthroughs or simply sets the stage for more dialogue. I think that's something that remains to be seen right now, but certainly all eyes are on that very moment in the Oval Office right now. So certainly a crucial meeting, a critical discussion taking place at the White House right now. Of course, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is accompanied with top members of his government. We saw the Turkish Foreign Minister, Hakan Fidan, in the Oval Office there. We also saw the Communications Director of Turkey, Burhanettin Duran, accompanying the Turkish President. And then from the American side, we saw Secretary of State Marco Rubio present at the Oval Office, and also the American ambassador to Turkey, Tom Barak, was also there. So, of course, many things are being discussed right now. It is a critical meeting for the relationship between the two countries. And we heard remarks from President Donald Trump about President Erdogan when the two leaders were interacting with the media in the Oval Office. Let's have a listen.
So this is a tough man. This is a guy who's highly opinionated. Usually I don't like opinionated people, but I always like this one. But he's a tough one. And he does an amazing job in his country. And we've had tremendous relationships, both having to do with war and having to do with trade. He's a highly respected man. He's respected very much in his country and all throughout Europe and throughout the world where they know him. He's built a tremendous military, powerful military, uses a lot of our equipment. And it's an honor to have him at the White House against sanctions against Turkey. Could be very soon. If we have a good meeting, almost immediately. Well, I think President Erdogan is the one responsible for Syria, for the successful fight in ridding Syria of its past leader. And I think this man is responsible. He doesn't take the responsibility, but it's actually a great achievement.
Welcome back. Joining me now here is Professor William Lawrence. He's a former diplomat and also a professor of international relations at the American University. Professor, great to have you. Well, you know, I just want to pick up on one thing that my colleague back in Istanbul, Yusuf Erim, was saying, that we have seen many interactions of Donald Trump with major world leaders, but the one that we saw about an hour ago in the Oval Office is perhaps one of the most cordial interactions we have seen over the past year or so. What do you make of that?
It was astounding to watch. It was really interesting. And there was that moment where Trump gushed and gushed, which he obviously had prepared in advance. And then he got the translation of what Erdogan had said, which had some points in it that were part of Erdogan's negotiating agenda, including some things about the Middle East. And then Trump shifted what he was saying and said, he's a tough guy, like he has strong opinions, but I like that about them. And then he went about him, and then he went back to praising Erdogan again. So I think the most astounding thing we saw today, from my perspective, is that normally this press spray is just to state your opinions, take some questions from the press, and then start the negotiations. We actually were watching the negotiations happen in front of us on the camera. We saw Erdogan make his pitch on the F-16s and the F-35s. We saw Trump make a pitch and even offer what the trade might be, buying less Russian oil and gas, and then getting perhaps the F-35 deal and the CAATSA sanctions removed and some of the other things Erdogan wants. So they were negotiating in front of the press, in front of our eyes, because Trump doesn't like to follow protocol, and he was trying to sort of get the negotiations started right there. That was astounding to watch.
Professor, you know, when it comes to this meeting right now, what is that one thing that really stands out for you? Is it going to be the F-35 deal? Is it going to be Gaza? Is it going to be trade ties? What do you think it is?
We don't know. Trump said he'd like to have some announcements by the end of the day. If there was an announcement on Gaza that was meaningful, great. If there's an announcement on the F-35s, great. If there's an announcement on sanctions, great. If there's simply an announcement about a big increase in trade between the countries, that's fantastic. The thing you and I didn't predict an hour or two ago when we were first talking was the oil and gas piece of it. So the U.S. would like to sell or arrange for Turkey to have alternate sources of oil and gas so that Turkey stops supporting the Russian economy, which is a big new thing for Russia. I know you talked about it with the last guest a little bit, but this is a really interesting thing because we can begin to see the makings of a deal here. What I've been wondering all morning is, what are the concessions Trump's going to ask for to give Erdogan what he wants? And I think that's one of them.
Professor William Lawrence, fascinating insights. It's always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for taking out the time for us here on TRT World. Certainly, it is a critical meeting that is taking place in the Oval Office right now. The White House is actually right behind us. It's a beautiful view. I'm really happy that the rain hasn't stopped because, you know, coming here in this morning was a nightmare because it was raining cats and dogs in the morning. But really happy to see that the rain hasn't stopped. But certainly diplomacy is underway at the White House right now. Here on TRT World, we'll be keeping you up to speed on all the latest developments coming out of the meeting happening right behind us. For now, back to Istanbul.
Jafar Hasnan and your guest, Professor William Lawrence, thank you very much for that. But there's plenty more still to come on this channel. We're going to continue our coverage of that meeting between the Turkish president and the US President Donald Trump. We've got our reporters on the ground in Washington, D.C., and our analysts on standby. That's it from me and the team here in Istanbul. Our team in London is standing by to take over. I'll see you again on Monday. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.